My name is Nick Gaston. I'm a software engineer. I've been working making slot games for about 12 years now, and doing other projects of various types before that. Um, and recently learned how to do TTS scripting, and heard that other people might be interested. So I guess I will just get started.
Yes. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop into the event chat. I will ask that everyone mute themselves unless they're responding or asking a question voice-wise. This just helps to keep background noise to a minimum so everyone can be in listening mode. Thank you for that. And I'm going to mute myself now so I can follow my own book.
All right, so I have this little TTS scripting mod, which is just kind of a starting point. So I'm going to go ahead and load that. And the first thing you want to do is save your game to a save file on your computer, and then load that save game.
A quick question is that we should probably find the link for this. Would you like us to follow along in Tabletop Simulator, or just watch you now and then try it on our own later?
You can follow along if you want to, or just watch. I find when I have or when I'm doing I guess participating in training things like this, it helps if I can follow along. So I can post the mod for TTS on here if people want.
Yes, if you could just pop that into the event chat, that'll be an easy place for everyone to find it. Excellent.
So we're in Tabletop Simulator. So kind of the fun or the main part of scripting in Tabletop Simulator uses this scripting window. You can type in the scripting window or use an external editor and copy and paste. I don't actually like typing in here because it's not very good. But this is your main scripting window. As you can see, there's Lua and UI. Lua code is your functionality. UI is XML code that basically puts buttons up or labels or input fields. Usually, any input elements are done with the UI tab, and then functionality is done in the Lua tab. So to start off, I'm going to get rid of some of this. We have a function on load. This is an event that is called when you load a game. And it will always be called whenever this object is loaded. In this case, it's our global object, so it would be when the mod is loaded. And we'll go ahead and put some script in here to see what happens. And then we have this little save and play button. So the reason I saved this mod when I started is because this button will save over whatever I currently have loaded, or at least it will save any script changes to what I currently have loaded and then reload that. So if you were running from a workshop mod, it would fail to save because you can't save to a workshop mod. And if you've made any changes to the scene and not saved those changes and reloaded the game, it won't save those changes. It will just wipe them out. So we hit save and play. And now we have a little hello world message down in our chat. So now let's add some more useful scripting. In order to add scripting to a specific object, you can right click and go to the scripting editor on that object. And now you can see the object appears in your scripting editor. And for the deck, we are going to go ahead and make it shuffle on load. So we'll use the same onload function, which is called when that deck is loaded. And we are going to call self.shuffle. Self is an object that refers to the game object this script lives on. And then inside of that, you have a lot of different functions you can call. Shuffle is going to shuffle our object. We paste that, hit save and play, and we have a 5 of spades right now. If we reload it again, it's now a 7 of hearts. So now every time you load this game, it's going to shuffle the deck at the start of the game, instead of the players having to remember to shuffle that deck. So that's kind of the root basics. As for the shuffle function, you can find most of those functions in api.tabletopsimulator.com. We'll go and post in the chat. And this is the API for Tabletop Simulator. It has all of the variables, the functions. This is kind of the primary resource that you can use to figure out what you can do and how to do what you're trying to do in Tabletop Simulator. I usually have it open anytime I'm doing any scripting. So it's a very good resource to have available to you. So let's go ahead and move on to, I think, our next piece. So over here, we have a bag and some marbles. We're going to add some script to the bag. So anytime you add a marble to that bag, it will shuffle it. For that, we're going to need another event. If we head into the API, we can find out what it's called. On object enter container. So this event is called every time an object enters a container in the scene, or in your game. It will actually be called on every object in the game anytime any object enters any container. So as a result, we have the container that the object entered and the object that entered that container as arguments to this function. For those who don't know, an argument is basically a variable that's pointing to an object or pointing to data. So inside this function, we first need to check to make sure the container that an object just entered is this container. So in order to do that, we're going to compare the ID of this container with the ID of the container that called this event. If those are a match, then we will shuffle it. So let's go on. For those who don't know, in Notepad++, you can select languages. And if you select a language, it will actually color code things to make it a little easier to follow along as to what you're actually doing. So now on our bag, we'll add this function. Do save and play again. Now we can drop all our marbles into the bag. And you'll notice every time we pull a marble out of the bag and re-add it, it shuffles it. So this is a very, very useful feature I found, because in a lot of games, if you have a bag, anytime you add something to it, the whole point is to shuffle the bag, and TTS does not do that by default. And that gives you, and now you have a basic idea of IDs and some of the functions. So we're going to move on to another piece. So in the middle, we have this meeple. One of the things I found in TTS is it's very hard to knock over an object. So we're going to add a script to this meeple so we can lay it down if, I don't know, the meeple gets knocked out, or you're playing a game where a meeple standing up and a meeple laying down are two different states. I will post the code in the chat a little, I think, at the end of this. So I'll probably post the full complete code in. And as to functions being overwritten, the arguments do not have any specific names. You can name them whatever you want. If you look at the API, it details what it expects, and often it may have a little info, which will give you more detail on what the arguments are or what they represent. All right, so on our meeple, where you want a function, yeah, let's do this in the nice happy code. To lay down the meeple. In order to lay it down, we first need to get the meeple's current position. We can use that. We can do that using the getPosition function. And we need the rotation. This is because we are going to adjust both of those, but we need to know where it is in order to know what the final destination will be. So we're going to increase the Y position by a little bit. Since the Y position is normally on the table, and since the Y position is the feet, and the feet are going a little bit above the table, we're going to want it to be a little bit higher than it is currently. And we also want to rotate the X position so that it actually lays down. Now, we just need to set the positions of these on the object. When you have set position, there are two set position functions you can use. Set position will move your object to that new position, and it will just snap there with no animation. If you use set position smooth, it will move to that position, but it will actually move there and animate to that position. The second argument that I placed is collide, and that is whether or not the object should collide with other objects while it is moving to that position. I recommend usually doing false on this so that it doesn't knock things off the table or do weird events. So now we have a function that will lay down the meeple. We just need a way to call that function. So we're going to go back to our onload function. And we are going to use a pretty new method called add context menu item. Yeah, Rod, if you could mute your mic.
Yeah.
So this method, it adds a context menu to this object, calls this function when that context menu is clicked, and I actually don't remember what the third argument is. I don't think it's in the API yet. So we'll just set it as false for now. Now we go back to our meeple. And if we hit save and play, if we right click on the meeple, we now have a lay down command, which knocks our meeple down. And because this is a figurine, defined in the custom model, if we grab it, it stands back up again. Now, I implemented this for a game I was working on, and somebody asked if I could make it a little bit simpler to use by not, instead of a context menu, you just hit a key on your keyboard to knock it down. And I found a little hack out there that people have used for that sort of functionality. So we're going to go and add that as well. It's using another event called onRandomize. This event is called anytime the object is shuffled or the shuffle command is sent to that object. Since this is a meeple, the shuffle command isn't going to really do much, but we can use that command to call our own function. So we'll go and update the code. And if I'm going too fast, please let me know. Like I said, this is the first time I've done this.
Nick, do you mind if I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I keep getting an error when I try to save and play that says end of IO expected near end. I guess it's, I don't know, my code looks pretty much like yours. I'm not sure if this is... yeah. But if it's not something that's on top of your mind, it's fine. I can find the other problem.
You may have end more than one time, but I would expect if you have something like that, it's because you either have one too few end commands or one too many end commands. Could be encoding format, though I don't know if there's any Unix versus Windows. I don't run into that.
Okay, thank you. I'll look it up.
So yes, objects, if you notice, this object has the name meeple. So when I bring it up in the scripting editor, that is what you see. So if you name your objects, they'll come up with that name. If they don't have a name, then it's just the generic name for that object. And yeah, now that we've added that onRandomize, if I hit R, the meeple lays down. All right, any questions at the moment? Okay.
Quiet crowd. All right, yeah, you're doing great. I definitely didn't know that you could tie a keyboard entry to that. Would there be a way of changing that keyboard command to make it lay down to another key, like maybe something in the number pad or another key on the board that doesn't correspond with an existing function?
I don't actually know of any way to listen for a key press. onRandomize was just something that a person suggested as a way to basically, hack it in so that you can do it on a keyboard press. But I have not seen any events for when a key is pressed to essentially do something on that.
Okay, no worries.
I got a meeple from the workshop. I will post a link to it later. But yeah, there was a workshop object that just has a bunch of meeple models that I've used for this and then for at least one other game. So then we're going to move on to some setup scripts, which is what a lot of games use scripting for. So over here we have a bag. Inside this bag is 5 different color meeples. So we're going to write a setup script to move these meeples out to their player positions. First, we're going to want a button that you can press. So we're going to use the XML UI to create a button for your bag. This is using the button tag. When we click it, we're going to call a setup function. And then we just have to position the button so it appears where we want it. A lot of these numbers are basically you create it, you mess with the numbers until you figure out, until it looks right. Unless you have a lot of experience and can do it naturally. I don't, so I just use big numbers until I find it and then change the numbers until it's where I want it. So as for coordinates on the UI, it uses local coordinates. So as you can see, the setup button is here. If I pick up the bag and move it, it follows the bag because it's on that bag's UI. There are probably ways to do it with the table, or you just have a game object that you lock on the table in order to put the button on a specific point. So now we have a button. Let's write the function that button is going to call. So this function is going to take all of our meeples and place them in locations relative to the players. In order to set up all of those locations and the meeples, we're going to start with a table. A table is it's an array. It's a set of. It's basically a variable that contains multiple variables. In Lua, tables are very powerful. So we're going to have a table called setup data. Actually, let's pull this back into Notepad. On that table, we will have an entry for each player. So we'll start with the white player. And then we'll go and set up entries for the object that we want to place. So we have a meeple that we want to place. I've already pre-saved the GUIDs for these. In order to get a GUID, you can right-click on an object and click this piece here, and it'll copy it to the clipboard so that you can paste it into your code. As for the GUIDs for the meeples inside the bag, I've saved those off just so that I don't have to pull each one out and grab them by hand. And then we're going to set up the positions that we want all of these to go to. Since this data is going to be mostly the same for all the players, we'll just copy and paste it a few times. Change the player colors. Green, red, and blue. Replace the GUIDs for the meeples. And change the positions. So now we have a table of all of the data, all of the stuff we want to set up when we set up our game. In our setup function, we're going to use a for loop to run through this table. A for loop it's designed to run a certain number of times, or in this case, run through every object in a table.
Do you need to tell it to do that, or will it automatically get to the end of the table and stop?
It automatically gets to the end of the table and stops. So a for loop, it can either run like 10 times, and you define the number of times that you want to run, or if you set it up like this, it will run for every variable within this table. Pair splits it into color, which is going to be these values, and then objects, which is the table value that color is assigned to. Inside our for loop, we're going to do another for loop. Which is going to run through all of these objects. So name would be the meeple. Info is going to be the table of the GUID and its position. So a GUID is a unique value for every object within the scene. If you clone an object, the new object will have a different GUID than the previous one. So there is one issue with what I'm doing right here, which is if an object is not in the actual game scene, it's not necessarily going to have a unique GUID. And since objects in a container aren't actually loaded right now, you can have the same GUID for multiple objects within a container. So this isn't the best way to do it, but if you set it up beforehand and everything is already pre-saved, then it either will work or it won't, and if it doesn't work, you can fix it and then make sure it works.
And of course, it's like, sorry, Kenny. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that as we're looking at this, obviously, we're looking at a professional that has done this many times. In case you're thinking of this as, like we play test games, we play test a version of it, we test it out, we see what works, we see what doesn't work, we go back, we fix some stuff, we try again. It's the same sort of loop, I'm guessing.
But yeah, basically.
No, I was just going to say, with actually your point, if you're playtesting and you start replacing objects instead of updating them, you will be losing your GUID.
Yes. So you will have to update this as you go. And there are other things you can do to fix that, depending on how you set things up, which I'll go over right after this. So for this, we're calling the takeObject method, which takes an object from inside your container and pulls it out. There's a lot of variables you can pass into this method. And it's actually you pass it a table, and then you specify what you want that table to contain. So most of the variables are optional, but you can specify where you want the object to go, the rotation, whether it's flipped. You can take objects using the index of the object in that container or the GUID of the object in the container. You can't use both because it won't know what to do if those aren't the same. Then yeah, top. Smooth is special. Smooth is like the smooth position. If it's set to true, it will move the object from the container to its new position. If it's set to false, it will just magically appear there. So we want to use false because we don't want things moving around the table on us. So I'm going to pass in the position that we want the object to go to, which is our POS variable, the GUID of the object that we're trying to grab, and then I also want it to be a smooth, or I don't want it to be a smooth transition, I just want it to magically appear in its new location. So we copy this code. make sure that we are on the Lua tab, and paste it. And now when we press the button, it will call this setup function, which will place all of the meeples into their player locations. And when I press it, we now have 5 meeples, all placed for the white, yellow, green, red, and blue players. If you press it again, it's going to fail because they're not in the bag, so it can't grab them. But if we put them back in the bag, then it should put them back where they're supposed to be. So let's say we want it to be a tiny bit smarter than it is right now, and only place the objects for players that are actually playing. We can add an if statement and use this handy player global class to see which players are actually seated and which ones are not. So we're going to call if player is seated. Pass in the color of the player that we're currently looking at. And then only place the object if that is true. I have not hit a limit on script length, and the X-Wing Unified mod is probably the mod I play most on Tabletop Simulator, and that has a ridiculously huge scripting element to it, so I don't think there is a scripting limit. Or if there is, they're probably the closest to hitting it from what I've seen. So we're going to save and play. And now, I'm going to sit down as the green player. If I hit this, only the green meeple appears because that's the only player that's currently sitting. If I change to red, then only the red meeple appears. So this is a good way to set up your game based on the number of players and based on who is actually sitting at the table. So you don't end up with a lot of extra stuff on the table that isn't necessary. Or if you have a deck of cards that the size is different based on the number of players, you can adjust that based on who is sitting at the table and who is not. So that's most of what I had. There's one more little thing I was going to do if... Oh, I guess I can cover this as well. So like I was saying, this is not a perfect method. It's going to throw errors if the object with this GUID doesn't exist, and it has the potential of having multiple objects with the same GUID, in which case this is going to cause problems because it doesn't know which one to grab. Mm-hmm. There is another method on containers you can use. Called getObjects. Yeah. And this will return a table of all of the objects in that container, the name, GUID, description. So one question, do you need to use a container for different sized decks? You could, or you could adjust the deck on the fly. It'd probably be, I think it would be easier if you had your different size decks set up by hand.
Yeah, it would be.
But you can do it without setting up by hand if you wanted to. As to what a container is a bag or a deck. A container is any object that contains multiple objects. So in some cases you have a bag, which is always a bag is always a container that can have 0 to X number of objects. In other cases, we have like 2 cards here. Each card is its own object. If you stack them together, it's now a container that contains 2 cards. And that's how the scripting sees it. So we can move on to the last little piece I had, which is kind of just an info. Get contain. I don't know. Let's see. Is there a way? Oh, actually, I think you can do.
Question: how do you get underscore container?
Sorry, what?
I was reading what the chat is. Sorry.
Let me see. I know there are functions to get every object in the scene. You can also get an object from a GUID using this method. And yeah, I'd have to look more deeply to find some of these. I think there's... Yeah, I don't see anything for like just get containers, but I know there is a way to get a list of like all of the objects in the scene, which I imagine is very slow. You can assign, so what I found is there's kind of 2 ways to assign a value to an object. You can, I guess multiple ways. You can name it. So for example, if the marble is worth 5 points, we could have, red 5. And maybe purple 2. And then in script, you can grab the name and look for that 5-point or 2-point value to determine how much the value is. On the same token, you can use the description. Or another option is you add a script to that object and have a value variable in it, which you can then read using, I think it's get variable. No, something like that. Get variable, or yes, it's something to that effect. And those are kind of the 3 ways I've done it to pull values in Tabletop Simulator. You still have to set it up on every object, so it can be a bit of a hassle. The other way you can do it, which I will go over right now. Oh, cool. So somebody just posted, all right. To answer an earlier question about binding actions to keys other than R, it looks like TTS configuration includes numbers 1 through 9 set as scripting buttons. And then the API Nick shared includes on scripting button down. So it looks like you can use the number keys to tie those number keys to an actual event on an object, if you want more button presses or button triggers. So
one thing you might want to go through is clearing buttons, because if people are making buttons on their prototypes and they have like 10 buttons for whatever reason, they would be best to be removed so people don't press them after doing their function, if you get me.
Oh, okay.
So like the dot clear function.
Doc player.
So dot clear buttons. So once you've got the object in the GUID, you then clear the buttons.
I've actually not done the clear buttons. Usually if I need to hide a button, I just change the visibility to false.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, I cleared the buttons.
But I haven't done much with creating buttons on the fly. Most of my buttons are set up beforehand. And every UI object has an attribute for visibility. So if you set visibility to false, it will hide any UI object you don't want to see. So we're going to do one more thing. So a zone, I guess there are a few zones. You have hidden zones, which just hide things, um, and they can hide things from other players. You have, I guess, randomized. I haven't played much with the zones, mostly just hidden and hand zones. Hand zones are, they kind of find where the players sit, and then if you pull an object into it, it will be visible to that player, but not visible to other players, and that's essentially your hand.
Show you some examples of scripting if you need some. If you want some extra ones.
I have not messed with hiding text within hidden zones.
I've never messed with that either. I've never experienced a game that
I'm
needs
not.
it as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the context would be for that.
Um, I mean, are they hidden? I thought they were. I guess they're not hidden inside hidden zones. I've never done it personally.
I guess, as in this text.
Yeah, if you text it.
Yeah, I don't know what if you could do. Huh? Maybe you could do it using the UI tools and set up something to make it visible to one player, not to other players. But you'd probably have to do it by hand or manually.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so one other thing we're going to do. Just get a little bit of useful. So in our global function, we're going to store that meeple ID. So copy it to the clipboard and paste it. And we're going to add some functionality to grab the data from that object. So first we need to grab the object. And we're going to use that getObjectFromGUID call. Then we'll grab the data for that object, which is all of the information used to create the object, to create that custom object. And that's what we're grabbing from getCustomObject. And then we're going to print it out using a function I wrote a little while ago that I've actually included in basically every TTS mod I've ever made. You cannot change the GUIDs. They are auto-generated so that they are always unique for every object in the scene, which is their purpose, is it's a global unique identifier. GUIDs are a great way to grab something that you know exactly what you want to grab and it's already present in the scene. If you don't want to use a GUID, you can do things like bind the onCollision event and then drop an object onto whatever it is you're scripting. There's probably a few other tricks, but those are the ones I've done.
We use loaded. We did modules in some of our mods.
Okay.
Yeah, like load in local, local load in local modules, so that you can alter decks and things without messing up your GUIDs and things.
Hopefully this pastes okay. Not quite the way I want it to look. So I just posted a function into the chat. And this is a function that, like I said, I've put in most of the mods I've made on TTS. It's a function that converts a table into a string so that you can output that table into the chat. And I found it very useful for debugging or just learning what tables are in TTS and how that data is being presented. So we're going to post this. We're going to create a new button. And I've done pretty much all of this. I did all of this beforehand, so if it seems like I'm typing very fast, it's because I've already written it out and I'm actually referencing pre-written files on a different monitor.
That sounds like cheating.
It is, but I've been in a few too many of these where somebody accidentally types something wrong and then they spend half of it trying to solve a syntax error, and I really don't like doing that.
No. It's perfect because it makes you look good. You're doing awesome, man. Keep going.
So in here, button width, height. Most of this is pretty self-explanatory. Instead of position, I'm using offset XY. This is kind of a two-dimensional position method. Since this is on the global UI, it's going to be based on the screen, and there is no Z positioning. And then on click, it's going to call this show meeple data function that I set up. So here's the new button that I just created. And when I click it, you can see all of the data for this little meeple in the center. So that's where the mesh is coming from. There's nothing assigned to the diffuse, the normal, collider. This is the color of it, or I guess the color of the specular. So this is very useful. One of the things I really like about this functionality is you can use this functionality to figure out what the object is. So for example, when we had these objects with point values earlier, I don't know if it even saved it. Yeah, it did. If you're using a different PNG image for each object that defined what that point value was, you could grab the custom data for that object and then determine its point value using that PNG image. And it's kind of a fast way to get some of that data, or to behave based on the actual images or meshes or the actual information of the object itself. You can use a script to create custom decks or other objects. There is a function call called spawn object. Anytime you do spawn object, it will create a new object in the scene. If you spawn a custom object, then you can call set custom object to set the data on that object. So image, looks like this is for a token, I think. So it'd be the image, the thickness, merge distance, and whether or not it's stackable. And you can get the data that you would use for that custom object from the code that I just demonstrated here. So if I wanted to create a meeple, if I wanted to create this meeple in the scene, I would use this data in set custom object right after spawning it. So any other questions?
Yeah, this has been really cool. Personally, I know HTML, and I've done a fair bit of stuff within WordPress. So it's nice to see if you have any experience with HTML. Obviously, the exact syntax is different, and some of the variables are going to be different. But if you feel kind of comfortable working with HTML, I just feel like there's a lot of similarities between that and Lua.
Not so many similarities between Lua and HTML, because HTML is a markup language, so it's just presentation, whereas Lua is a Turing complete language, so it has loops, it has if statements, it has functions. It'd be closer to JavaScript or
Okay.
But yeah, if you've done any programming with JavaScript, C++, Perl, PHP, any programming that uses essentially for loops, while loops, or if statements, then Lua is very easy to pick up. I don't have a good resource for learning Lua because by the time I did, I already knew how to program. So it's just learning the syntax. Looking around online, I found this website that seems to be pretty good. That seems to do a pretty good job of explaining the syntax and the functionality of Lua. It's more designed for running just kind of a command line Lua, but you can definitely use what it has to learn how to do Lua for Tabletop Simulator.
Obviously, there's plenty more to learn about this subject and figuring out the best ways to implement the elements of scripting you want to put into your own specific game. So, what are some of the more interesting ways you've seen scripting used, perhaps?
So I've done a few games. I can actually show a couple of them.
I've also done quite a few if you need any more examples.
Let's see. So I'm guessing at least one or two of you have probably seen this game.
Yes, Michelle's game.
So some of the scripting that's done in this one, there's a few. This one uses a lot of the on collision method, or the on collision event, and of course auto shuffle. But I added a lot of scripting on these. So if you drop the stairs on it, it pushes them underneath this object and locks them in place. If you drop a trap, there's specific locations it can be, and same with the bars. And then on collision, it figures out, uses this get closest position function to figure out the distance between where you dropped it and all of those points earlier, and then places it in the closest position to where you dropped it. So it's a way to do snapping logic that's smarter than the normal snap points that you would have. So if you drop it,
Yeah, I was like, sorry. Okay. Yeah, I was actually just about to ask why you would use the scripting for that instead of the usual sort of magnet points or the usual snap points. But this sounds, because it's quote unquote smarter, you spend less time fiddling and stuff.
Yeah, and that way, these don't snap to where the bars would be, and most important, like the stairs, if you use a snap point, the stair is just going to stay on top of it. But without the snap point, I can move it underneath and lock its position to enforce that it ends up there. Let's see, one other thing that I do in this one is we have these little meeples. And then if you drop the little cubes on the status zones, it adds little status images above it. And the way it's doing that is on here I have an on collision event. I use on collision a lot in most of my mods. That does a few things. It checks to see if a meeple was dropped on it, and if it was, then it says this is my meeple, and that is how it associates this board with this meeple. And then anytime you drop a cube, it checks the distance of that cube to a list of positions. And again, it sees what the closest position is, if it's within a minimum radius. So if I drop the cube, over here, it's not going to say that you're on fire just because that's the closest position. And then if it's within there, then it adds then it tells the meeple to display its little on fire indicator.
Nice.
See, another game I did that is actually currently in Kickstarter is this one. So this game, the big thing is this is a tile placement game. So you place tiles, and again, you have snap points. Instead of doing snap points on these to place all of the tiles, I did that collision again. And the reason I did that is because we have some tiles that are 4 tiles in length, and you don't want those snapping to the center of one of these squares because that's going to be the wrong position. You want it to snap to the edge of the square, or if it's in this rotation, to this edge. So it figures out what the rotation is and then snaps it so that it's still within, so that the center point is on the edge of a square instead of in the middle of a square like these ones use.
Wouldn't you just use a grid for that, though?
You could, but again, all of these would snap to all of the same positions.
Not in a... No, not a grid. Would it?
I'm pretty sure it would. I think it uses the center position of each object to snap to predefined positions on the grid.
And grids also have fun when you have just on those. Is that also good, isn't it?
So one question, are the indicators separate objects? So on those meeples, the indicators were actually done using the UI. Pull that back up.
We did some with a grid, and I don't think we used any on collision scripting, as far as I'm aware.
And maybe there might be a good way to do it that I'm not aware of. From what I've experimented with, I didn't find anything in Tabletop Simulator to make some objects snap in one position and other objects snap into a different position.
Just set our grid to snapping center.
So yeah, on the meeples, I have a UI that has images above the meeple. It has basically 5 images above the meeple, and then in code, I say what image I want to load in each of those positions. So instead of being objects, it's just UI elements that are turned on or off, and then have the image set dynamically. And feel free to, I know for me personally, anyone is free to use any code I have written.
Awesome.
I don't really take possession or ownership of code, and most programmers I've found don't. They are more than happy to help other people learn how to do cool things and share cool coding elements. And because in Tabletop Simulator, you can open this scripting window on any mod, you can see the code for any mod that you have on your computer. Some people, now, like I said, me personally, you can use any code I've written. I do not have any issues with other people using my code. Some people may, but you can always look at code to get a reference for how they did something and see how that might apply to a game that you're writing or a game that you're creating. And it's probably the best resource I've found is looking at other mods and looking at how they did things to see how you might be able to do things better or do things on your own.
Yeah, because if nothing else, what you're seeing here is a real-world example of how scripting is done within the context of this game. So if you can figure out what element of that script you want to use, you can then kind of reference that. Other than other people's mods, what else have you personally used to kind of stay up to date on where scripting is going, what people can do with scripting today versus stuff that was created years ago?
I kind of just started scripting in the last 3 months because I was furloughed from my job and I needed something to do. So I don't have a lot of history with it. I do know Tabletop Simulator, I think, has a page where they post updates, patch notes. So in their patch notes, they actually will discuss updates to their UI and to their API. And often this will be updated before their actual API webpage. So you can find out new things they're implementing or new features you can use by looking at the patch notes that might not be on the API page or distributed elsewhere.
Yeah, I guess it takes time to incorporate all of the notes into the
Well, and
that already exists.
so which I'll get to this question as well here. So, for example, this add context menu item is a pretty new addition to the API. I don't think it's in the API webpage yet. I saw it on another game mod that I was playing, and then I saw it in the patch notes, and that's where I learned to use it. As to comments in Lua, Lua does have comments. And we're going to pull it back into here because I like color coding. So to do a comment in Lua, you do 2 dashes for a single line comment. Comments are basically, you can type whatever you want and it's not going to do anything. It is just there to make the code more readable and help other people see what you're doing or help you remember what you were doing on those lines. In order to do a block comment, which is a multi-line comment, you just need 2 dashes, 2 square brackets, and then square brackets on the other side. What a lot of people will do is add 2 more dashes on this side of the square brackets. And the reason is, I'm going to put it here. So for example, let's say I want my laydown function to do nothing because it's breaking the game right now and I don't want it to break the game right now. So I put a block comment around it and I add another couple dashes on the end, and then if I want to uncomment it, all I have to do is add 1 more dash here. That turns this into a single line comment, and all of this code will now be executed. So this is another good feature for debugging. It can let you remove code from your scripts without deleting it, so that you can test individual elements of the script to make sure specific pieces are working or figure out what isn't working.
Very cool.
And then, yeah, remember, we have this wonderful print function. This print function will actually only display to the person that is hosting the game. So you can put debug code in here, and actually, if you have any other players on your game, they won't even see it. It will only display to you. So it is a wonderful place to put debug code when you're testing or implementing scripting in order to find out. Interesting. In order to find out more about what your code is doing behind the scenes and try to figure out any bugs, or if any bugs pop up, get more info on them so that you can fix them in the future. And we have another comment. Check out VS Code, which I did not know that Visual Studio had Lua support. That is really cool.
Yeah, it's free as well, so check it out. I use it for Ruby and Puppet Code as well. So.
Interesting. So yeah, Visual Studio is a terrific IDE. It's a terrific code editor, and I use it. That's basically all I use at work. But I did not know that it supported Lua as well. And I think they have. I think they have free versions of Visual Studio that are just limited in their scope. So that's another good one to check out. I use Notepad++ a lot because it's like, you know, the smallest, easiest, simplest code editor there is. But it definitely does not have the scope and power of Visual Studio.
Quick question: have you taken any of your work like into the physical world, like from Tabletop Simulator, and actually has a physical board game? And how many times has like scripting kind of like caught you out and surprised you, like with speed and like preparation of the game in the real world?
So I have not none of the games I have scripted have been released yet. One of the games I wrote scripts for is in Kickstarter right now. But yeah, that's the only one.
Can you ask the question again, David? I can answer this quite.
Yeah, so I can see where this is really powerful, and I can also see where it can be. You can get quite a shock when you take your actual product into, because a lot of the time I'm using this to like test my development in the games, but eventually they're probably going to be in physical form. But if I'm doing a lot of scripting and things, and doing things magically, I can see that might change the experience of the game quite dramatically, especially if there's things that like shuffling takes time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can absolutely agree. Yeah, a lot of our we've all set up a heavy Euro game. Gloomhaven, for example. You know how long that takes you to set up for your first time. And when the digital experiences, they can give you the illusion of how quick it actually is on TTS, which is shocking when you get to it physically. But that's also the benefit of a digital platform, is you're allowed to set up a game with such ease and playtest something to try it out without obviously having to purchase it or spend the time and getting the group together. It definitely does change how you design games, for sure. Especially if we're going to play testing using scripts, because you will start. Oh, it's weird enough. You'll start refining your game with your script language. So you'll start be like, okay, how can I make that smoother to set up that by reducing the code, by reducing the amount of components in your game and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's important to try to think of scripting should solve the problems in Tabletop Simulator. For example, it's very easy to lay down a meeple. It is not easy to do it in Tabletop Simulator, so a script is a perfect thing to do for that. Same thing with positioning.
It is, though. It's really easy to do it on TTS without scripting.
Is it?
It's incredibly easy, yeah. You create a Blender file and just have the rotations so that when you import it in, you have it imported flat, and then you create a two-state
True. You can definitely do it with using states.
I don't think you necessarily need scripting for that.
I think the other, with blind play testing as well, I think the other caution is where you are expecting people to sort of have an intuitive, that you want your game to be intuitive, but if they come along to it and your scripts sort of act as boundaries and sort of safety cushions against what they're going to do, maybe they can't play something somewhere, you're not going to see that when you blind play test, because they're going to be like, oh, okay, it kind of like the game's reacted to them, but in the real world, in the physical sense, you can't put those cushions and boundaries in there. So I guess that's the other cushion to it, but yeah, I guess you've
it depends on, like you said, with scripting, you can go as far as full automation. Everything is automated to the point where you can't actually even move anything to the wrong location without it bouncing back at you, telling you that's wrong, to as simple as, well, as you've been shown in this test here, just put some stuff on the table and let the players go at it. So at the end of the day, it's your choice of how much, you could call it intrusion of scripting do you want, versus freedom of use. Whenever we script our games for publishers and designers, we always have the intention of, if you are buying this game physically, we want you to learn the game as we're scripting it, not holding your hand, and then when you get to the game physically, things are confusing and stuff like that.
So a couple more questions. One person asked, where are the scripts saved when editing a local mod? If you, all of your information for all TTS games are saved in JSON files. And if you look at it, this is all the information for that game. And let's see if we can find one. The Lua script is saved as a single line with all of your new lines and stuff saved within that line. So it's very, very, very hard to edit this by hand. I've done it, but you don't want to. And basically, I've done it when I want to automatically add scripts to an object in my game, because you can save it as a single string and just basically save that to a single object script in the game.
So this is something really important, is to share, if you use the same JSON file between players if you are using multiple scripters. There's nothing worse than one person editing a JSON file on, and then it being resaved and stuff. Just keep it always the same one.
And I'm guessing there are probably better ways to do this. I know a lot of the larger TTS mods have GitHub directories where they save most of their code. And I imagine there's easier ways to get that code into Tabletop Simulator than copy and paste it into the editor. But I have not found a lot of resources on how to set up those methods yet. So right now, copy and paste works, so that's what I've been using.
Can I ask about the marketplace? I mean, coders aren't a profession that game designers have needed to really deal with up to now. You know, we're used to dealing with, or you know, many of us are. You know, we know there's a market for illustrators, for graphic designers. How do you think the market for coders is evolving? Is it going to be a similar sort of thing? Is it, you know, do you pay for a job? Do you pay hourly? What would we expect to pay? I mean, can you shed some light on that?
I actually don't know. I'm guessing the last few months have changed that significantly. But
yeah, I can answer this. Sure, I can answer this. So I run Overboard Games. We are a publish. We make TTS content for publishers, designers, and we've been doing it for over 3 years. So the context of the necessity for scripters has been mixed. There is for the people we've worked with, there's majority have wanted scripting for their mods, and what you'll notice is there's digital limitations through which you would not maybe realize. So, like polyomino games are quite difficult to implement into TTS attractively. As you showed with the donut game and with one of our games, it's like the publishers would say we would show them, hey, this is how things look, and it will look kind of ugly because of it's not snapping correctly and things like that, and that's where scripting comes into it. What was your other part of the question? Did you want to answer?
One person asked, "Have you used scripting?"
I was wondering what the marketplace now looks like. So, in terms of, you know, I've read lots about, you know, hiring graphic designers, hiring illustrators, the sort of contracts that they would expect to, you know, how you know, what sort of contracts would be set up, and even what I might expect to pay. But I would have no idea if I had you know, if I wanted to, you know, script, let's say a board game like Azul. You know, how long would that take? What's it likely to cost me? What does the contract look like?
Let me try and pull up an example of, like, maybe I'm gonna be really rough because I obviously I've come in here with any notes because if I pull up a game, where is it? Finding one. Normally we personally run an hourly rate on our side. So we will look at the complexity of the script, and we will give a quote on that. That's due to the fact that, like, it's more like variables, if you get me. So something that has like less variables and less less things you need to change.
Yeah,
is obviously cheaper. Like decks of cards, you know, putting things out on a table. It's kind of like a cake, if you get me. So like, the cheaper things would be like just putting the things in the bowl, and then if you have to then mix it, and then you have to put things on top of it, and then you've got to cook it. It's kind of like that. Is like if your one object of like a card then has like 7 different variables that we need to do to it. From like it now has it's for example has meeples now on top of it, and then those meeples from that card spread out somewhere. Right. And now it's that kind of thing. So it's like So,
okay, that tells me, scripting can be easier or harder. But as I say, I don't understand at this point what does a typical contract end up looking like? So you say you tend to work on an hourly rate.
So, I mean, as like a developer, I would say that while we'll present to you an estimate based on like how hourly, like how long we think it'll take us.
Right.
But like the contract itself, a lot of times will be by task or by like overall.
Okay.
Like it's freelancing, in my experience.
I would agree to that too. Yeah.
Someone won't give us like an hourly contract. They'll give us a by task contract.
Right.
Yeah. So we.
Yeah.
That's how we do it too. Like we understand how long it's going to take, but then we like give you the full amount, kind of thing.
Okay.
Let you know how that works, and like we also have, helped people with scripting as well past the point. Because people like once we give them something, it's like up to you now what you do, and then if they start changing things, we then give tech support for them too, teaching them how to script and things like that, so that they understand when things go wrong. So like we had a guy who we gave a finished product to, and they're like really happy with it. It worked smoothly, and they started updating it, and then we just go through a nice little process of teaching them, like you just said today with the GUIDs. Like he just changed the card and didn't know why it was broken. And then we teach the players, the designers and publishers, like, for free. This is a completely free thing. I do it for free because like I'm teaching them how the platform works. Post project, if you get me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, so as part of that discovery, do you call that kind of like part of the discovery phase where you actually play the game then, and like maybe draw like state diagrams, and then you can start giving an estimate after that point? Because I guess you don't know until you play it, right?
No, exactly. And unfortunately, like, especially if someone gives you I can't read all the rule books, like, from start to finish. So it's a nice little mutual connection between the publishers and designers to say, hey, okay, this is our estimates based on what you've got. But, like, if it's a work in progress game, like a Kickstarter, which is what we normally work with, things can change. So we do work on estimates, and then sometimes people will want, like a firm fee, and that's fine. We do that as well. But like I said, it's your Kickstarter suddenly has 7 more decks than it did like a month ago because you playtested it differently. Then obviously you have to have a mutual conversation about how that's going to change things and stuff. But everyone I've worked with has been incredibly friendly, really nice, and really acceptable with how things work at TTS because it's a new environment to them. It really is. So it's been interesting learning from a non-digital viewpoint.
Yeah, if I may add something as a software developer as well, I think that, of course, you can have a very simple contract and say, deliver something that someone needs, like a publisher or a designer or something, and that would be fine. But normally with software, what really matters is how you maintain the software. So if it's just like a gig, then you do it and someone is happy with their prototypes or even games, that's super cool. But how that's going to evolve, that's something else completely. So I guess this is where probably the most work is for most of the projects I've been working in my career.
I can show you an example of like a very... this was one we did quite a while back. I can show my... I don't think I can share my screen anymore with TTS because it's kind of broken now. How did you end up working with your TTS to get it working, Nick? Because my Discord broke with TTS sharing now for some reason. Or are you just doing sharing your screen, like full screen?
Oh, I'm just sharing full screen.
Yeah, it's weird how it broke like that. I can show you my screen to show you like quite a big script we did. If you want.
Yeah, I can stop streaming.
Let me share my screen, do full screen. 1 second.
I would say it's quite hard to automatically test with it because most of it's like manually driven, isn't it? By people picking up things and objects, and you can't really apply continuous delivery to it or like develop methodologies to it. So I guess it is quite hard to maintain once you've got those scripts.
There's a few more other.
I guess you could write like short unit tests around.
Sorry, sorry. Let me just share my screen. A second, save. Okay, share my screen.
So Nick, there's a new question from Pablo in the events chat there.
I think my Discord's cracking up. Give me a moment. I'm just gonna restart.
I have not haven't played many dexterity games on Tabletop Simulator. I think it would be weird to try and do scripting with it. I mean, I guess you could. It's just it depends on how you want to translate dexterity in real life to dexterity in software.
There we go. So I've got my thing up now.
And as to Shadrach, sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing that name. So you can actually change the values on a die without any scripting involved. If you look at the Gizmo tool, there's I think rotation values function where you can change what those values are. And as for the images, you kind of have to create a custom die with your own images, as far as I know. I don't know if there's a way to map the same side to multiple sides of a die.
Yep, there are templates for the various die types, D6s, D10s, and so on. Once you've done that, you would create a die in the custom tool, and then go from there. Kenny, this is Europa Universalis?
Yes.
I never
So,
pronounce that. Okay.
yeah, so it's just like one. So these are all the buttons in the game. These are like customized. So this is like what you'd call like a pretty hefty script. There's a ton of objects in the game. It'd be so much to go through. I mean, if I like show you our like scripting thing, we haven't got anything in the global, but we have 3 deck scripts just to self-shuffle upon functioning. And then our asset bundle, which is just our table, so it stops it from falling through. It's just a self-interactable false, so that way when you right-click on the table, there's nothing happening, so you can't unlock the table and it will fall through. And then we'll have the board is everything that is scripted. So the entire board has all our scripts on. And when we press a button, something will happen, and this will do some of the things you've been taught today, like removing hands and things. So if I click for player, the things disappeared, the decks spawn in, they shuffle, then they draw out, and again everything else draws out too.
That's magical dice.
And
Yeah, why aren't you teaching?
Kenny, if you're available in a couple of weeks, have no.
I can do. I work in a team, so I do usually deal with minor scripting to help with like tech support. So I like understand the basics of how things function. So when things break, which are quite simple usually, I can help fix them. But I'm normally the guy who designs and puts everything in the game. You see, I have someone in my team who does most of the scripting, and he teaches me things too, how to fix things up when he's not around. And then I have a 3D modeler as well who designs all the rooms and all the tables.
And obviously, it very much depends on the game and how long's a piece of string. But I mean, what sort? How much are board gamers, board game designers or board game publishers paying? As a lower and upper bracket. What sort of price is it? Can be spent here.
It's so difficult to really say like an exact amount, because like if it's simple, like a super simple game, you might just be looking at like £50 just to shuffle some decks. If no one has any experience at all and they don't want to even get into it, and it's just a few decks and you're just loading things up, you could say like £50 maybe. But if you're expecting like like things spawning on the boards, things disappearing, multiple decks shuffled and coming out, and potentially more than that, like for example we have we all know what a lazy Susan is, right? Yeah, so like this is Planet Unknown, and this is in physical form when you bought it on Kickstarter, if you bought it in the deluxe version, is a spinning circle. So how the heck do you do that in TTS? Like that sounds ridiculous, but that's the kind of concept, is like that. If you look at that game physically and you have no idea about scripting, it sounds impossible to do in TTS. So it's like learning to do that. It's like this is quite a big of a task, because you have to then learn. You have to do a lot of scripting to make sure things don't fall through the table, things spawn right, and
I played a game which had a spinning disc. Every time you spun the disc, if you spun it too quickly, everything would just fly off because of the centrifugal force.
Yeah, and that's what happened in our scripting tests. We were testing how to spawn the objects, testing how to make sure the objects were locking and unlocking, and so that the jammings won't happen. And it took us about 3 or 4 iterations to kind of understand what scripting language we should use, the functions, to make sure this thing works, so that when you hit rotate right, things move. And you hit left, to go left way, And so when you pick up a tile, you would put it down on your grid, like so.
Right.
And again, these are not tiles, because anyone who plays TTS or has an experience in TTS designing is tiles don't normally touch. You can't get tiles to get this close without them freaking out because social distancing for some reason. So these are models.
Right.
And it's stuff like that which I know you're trying to ask about the estimate of pricing and scripting and how it all works, but stuff it really is just a variable amount.
I understand that, and I'm not asking for hard and fast figures. It's just trying to understand how the market is working. Is it very similar to employing a graphic designer or an illustrator, or is it are you employing a team as opposed to an individual? Is it fixed fee? Is it just trying to get an idea?
Honestly, it's been over my 3 years of doing this, it has been a very mixed bag.
Right.
There will be big publishers who will want contracts, NDAs, various things signed, very much a strict process. And then I'll find an indie designer who's doing a self-published person, and he's obviously not got all that necessary for legal side towards his game. And it's very much like maybe a no contract basis, or just making sure that, hey, make sure you're doing these things, and very simply, simple contract. And then in some cases, some people just don't need it. They say, oh, I have no need for a contract, and they'll tell me that, and we won't do one. It is full of variables. And I'm not trying to deflect it. I mean it in the absolute honesty I've done it. I think I've done 30 mods. I've been around 30 mods now from AAA, like Portal games, Stronghold games, and and then down to indie self-published people you've probably never heard of, but they've all had successful Kickstarters and they've all used the platform.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very cool. Kenny, we're going to have to talk about bringing you on to do some other teaching here. So obviously this group has a lot of expertise, and I'm definitely open to hosting other events like this. In fact, I don't know if you guys have seen it yet or not, but we'll actually be having Zev Schlesinger from WizKids, the publisher, on Wednesday. So moving forward, beyond the actual playtesting that we all do on Mondays and Thursdays, I would just like to go ahead and say that it would be really cool to hear some of your expertise, however it comes out. And the hosts will have to discuss the best way to make this all kind of come together. But Kenny, I would love to have you on at some point in the near future to hear, how you work, how your skill set can help us make better games. To come back to our host for this event, Nick, thank you so much for all of your hard work in setting things up. And thank you, Kenny, for sharing your screen and showing that really cool rotation mechanic off. To come back to Nick, any final things that you'd like to share right now, or any final questions we can get to from the chat?
Let's see. I guess there's one question that I didn't mention anything on. I have not done any scripting for AI purposes. I know the X-Wing mod has some AI scripting, but in general, I don't think I would usually recommend it. If a board game is using AI, part of playing the game with that AI is playing the AI. and it might be an element that you're better off actually playing yourself and seeing how it plays out than using scripting to automate it.
Mm-hmm. I would agree to that. When in the very early days of us starting out, we had a very, should we say, naive indie publisher who has now scrapped his game. He asked us for an AI for TTS, and we didn't have a scripter at the time. So I went out and found a scripter who does TTS scripting and is a professional software developer, and he gave a quote of £2,000.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and so he wanted it fully scripted, like an absolute fully scripted AI game to be, and I don't know if that quote is an accurate quote or not, but that was one of my experiences in my very early days of having a conversation with someone who wanted an AI for their game. It may be cheaper now, it may be easier, but I have yet to do one. There is one mod on the workshop right now called, actually, it may have been taken down actually now. It was Carcassonne. Carcassonne does have an AI on it, but I think it has been removed from the workshop due to copyright.
Yeah.
Nice thing.
Okay. Yeah. So Nick, there's a request to post your script from the tutorial. I believe you did that.
I posted one function.
Yeah.
I'm posting the rest of it right now.
Excellent. Okay. Excellent. Thank you again, Nick. I'm not finishing up this bit, but I am trying to sort of bring this to a conclusion. We have been on this for about an hour and a half now. And yeah, obviously there's a lot of stuff that we can all learn. This is just feeling like we're scratching the surface here. Ian, any thoughts? Any other questions that you might have?
I'm just thinking what we might be able to do with the save files, and whether or not we should perhaps start gathering these sort of resources onto the virtual playtesting website, so it'll be there as a permanent resource, and we can perhaps put, as well as the video, we can actually have the scripts and things sort of as files there.
Yeah,
that's probably the easiest place. I hate trying to navigate Discord.
Yeah, yeah. I think one thing we can do is probably make up a blog post about everything that was talked about here, the video and everything else. Put everything together in one place. So yeah, once again, thank you everyone for joining. Kenny, stick around, buddy. I'd love to chat with you a little bit more. So once again, everyone, thank you. If you have any questions for Nick, Nick, what's the best way to contact you, work with you, read more about you, promote yourself a little bit if you want?
Probably the best way would be talking to my wife, who is, I think, in this group very frequently.
Your agent, we get it.
But yeah,
I mean, he's in the Facebook group and on Discord. You could probably just message.
Okay. Yeah, and for those that missed the announcement, Nick Gaston is Michelle's spouse. So, obviously, yeah, makes sense that they would be that she would be his agent. So, okay. Thank you again to everyone that attended. We're going to call it a day here.
Well,
and
rather than, what I suggest is anyone that wants to hang around, drop out of the scripting event and into the lobby. And if anyone wants to organise playtests now, then if there's enough people interested in doing it, then we can go ahead and do that.